So welcome everybody to our presentation today. My name is Maggie Bunbury and I'm the Clean Energy Research Coordinator with the Sierra Club Canada Foundation's Atlantic Canada chapter. And joining me today on the line also from the Sierra Club is Tanette DeVoe. She is our communications lead with the Beyond Coal campaign, and Ocean, who is our graphic and multimedia person on the campaign as well. So this presentation today is going to be an overview of Nova Scotia's electricity landscape. So how our province in Nova Scotia is set up to transition away from fossil fuels such as coal and natural gas and into a greener electricity grid involving wind and solar and battery storage. So as I mentioned, what you're going to be seeing today is a result of the Beyond Coal campaign, which started in the, sorry, just somebody else is in the waiting room here. As much as Tanette might say I'm a Zoom expert, I'm really not. Okay, I think I got everybody. So yeah, the Beyond Coal campaign started in January of 2021 with the goal of transitioning Atlantic Canada's electricity sector into clean, non-emitting sources of energy. So this presentation today is going to focus on absolute zero. And this might be a term that not everybody's familiar with, but I will explain it to you. So here at the Sierra Club, we expect more than the status quo. The status quo today for most governments, businesses, and organizations is to reach net zero. The problem with this is the way that net zero is currently structured allows for large emitters to continue to pollute the environment while offsetting their emissions with carbon credits, tree planting initiatives, and carbon capture and storage technologies. And half the time we cannot even trust these emitters to properly regulate their own offsetting activities. But we think we can do better here. We're picturing an electricity and energy sector that is absolute zero. So this term incorporates an energy grid where there is 100% non-emitting sources of energy. And this means that we will not require the use of carbon capture and storage technologies, the use of planting trees, or other offset initiatives. This term, absolute zero, also includes forms of energy that have the lowest impact on the surrounding environment. So this would not include areas of electricity such as large-scale hydro or nuclear, which can have detrimental impacts on the environment. And a recent report by the David Suzuki Foundation called the Shifting Pathways Report has shown that it is possible to reach 100% zero emissions in the electricity sector by 2035. And this presentation will break down how well positioned Nova Scotia is to meet this target and what the province can do to achieve it. So in the beginning, we have humble beginnings here in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia was predominantly relied on coal for electricity. The first electrical power plant in the province opened in 1907, and to this day, coal still makes up a large portion of the province's electricity portfolio, with 46% supplied by coal and petcoke sources. And the majority of utilities in the beginning of electrical power generation in the provinces were owned and operated by townships and municipalities or small-scale private investors, usually one or two individuals who needed the electricity generated at a plant for their business operations. So the electricity in the province, although it started off pretty dirty with coal, was rooted in grassroots utilities with townships and municipalities owning the majority of their own electrical generation and distribution. As we move forward through the electrical generation development in the province, utilities start entering the scene. So this image shows Tufts Cove generating station which is located in Dartmouth and circa 1964. And you'll see the logo on the side says NSLP. So this stands for the Nova Scotia Light and Power Corporation, which was the first large-scale utility in the province. The next image here is of the Strait of Canso, and you'll see on the bottom of the screen here a smokestack This was an electrical generation plant operated by the Nova Scotia Power Corporation. And this photo is from 1970. So years later, after the Nova Scotia Light and Power Corporation, a Crown Corporation was developed by the province, and this corporation was called the Nova Scotia Power Corporation. And through the years, both utilities began acquiring small, municipally owned producers throughout the province, effectively monopolizing the power industry in the province. And in 1972, the government of Nova Scotia purchased the Nova Scotia Light and Power Corporation and amalgamated it into the then Crown Corporation, Nova Scotia Power Corporation. So a pattern of amalgamations and monopolization of the power industry in our province. So many more people here. In the recent years, so in 1992, the Nova Scotia Power Corporation was privatized and renamed Nova Scotia Power Incorporated, which is a utility that we have in our province today. And you can see this image here is a thank you letter to Nova Scotians on the day that the utility went private and was effectively renamed Nova Scotia Power Corporation. And in 1998, the shareholders of the Nova Scotia Power Incorporation voted to restructure the enterprise to create a holding company that would be shareholder owned, making Nova Scotia Power Incorporated a wholly owned subsidiary of the holding company. And this holding company is now known as Amira Incorporated. This is a cartoon done by Bill McKibben that has been featured in the Chronicle Herald. So now Nova Scotia Power Inc. is a for-profit privatized corporation, which means it is highly motivated to generate the greatest returns for their shareholders, which effectively compromises their ability to provide clean, renewable energy at rates that are affordable for their customers. So this kind of gives an overview of where we're at currently in the province. We've moved away from small-scale electricity producers into large-scale for-profit privatized corporations that are responsible for supplying Nova Scotians with their electricity, which today is pretty impossible to live without. So now we're going to move into the landscape of the province today. So Nova Scotia's greenhouse gas emissions reached 15 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2020. This approximately equals 3.2 million cars. So just to give you a visualization of how much our province emits. Even though we are a small province, we do contribute our share to the world's emissions and the country's emissions. This next graph here shows a breakdown of Nova Scotia's Power's current electricity mix. So the majority of our power is generated by coal, which is 46% from coal and petcoke sources. And petcoke is a product of the oil refining process with similar properties to that of coal. So if you hear petcoke and you're not sure what that means, it's basically equivalent to coal. 8% of the electricity mix in 2021 was derived from imports from other provinces. These imports include imported power delivered to Nova Scotia via transmission corridors from New Brunswick and Newfoundland. So we are heavily tied into our neighboring provinces' grids as well. The renewable portions of the graph reflects biomass, solar, and non-wind COMFIT. COMFIT was a program that was introduced in the province that stands for Community Feed-in Tariffs, which meant that small-scale electricity producers, mostly municipal or towns or individuals, could sell their produced power back to the grid. And it also, this slice of the pie also includes renewable energy delivered via the Maritime Link. And for those of you who aren't sure what the Maritime Link is, Nova Scotia Power made a deal with Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro that basically is a contract which sees Nova Scotia receiving 165 megawatts per year from Muskrat Falls, which is a large-scale hydro development located in Labrador. And this comes across the Maritime Link, which is a subsea cable which connects the island of Newfoundland to the island of Cape Breton. And we receive this power in exchange for Nova Scotia Power paying for 20% of the cost for developing the infrastructure used for the Maritime Link. So Amira Incorporated, if you remember from a few slides earlier, the parent company, Nova Scotia Power, was given approval by the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, which is responsible for overseeing and regulating utilities in the province. They were given the green light to start recovering costs that were spent on constructing the link, and these costs are being repaid by Nova Scotia Power ratepayers, even though we have yet to receive the full block of hydro that was promised to be coming across the link. So currently, if you are a customer of Nova Scotia Power, you are paying for the infrastructure of this link, which supplies mega hydro from Labrador that we're not even getting. And in October 2021, it was actually reported that Nova Scotia ratepayers have paid over $205 million to Muskrat Falls since 2018. And this information is almost a year old. So we can be expecting to see another large bill come through the door from Nova Scotia Power to pay for this infrastructure. And you'll see here where the dark navy piece of the pie, which says natural fracked gas, something you will often see is people saying natural gas, and that term sounds quite lovely. It's natural. In fact, it is natural, but it's not something that should be marketed as green or clean. Most of this gas is obtained through fracking processes, which are very detrimental to the environment and have been shown to have very negative side effects. So we started using the term fracked gas and oil and moving away from the use of the term natural. So the current strategy from the province, last year, the Nova Scotia government and legislature put forward the Environmental Goals and Climate Change Reduction Act. And in that act, we have a renewable energy standard, which states that Nova Scotia has a target to reach 80% renewable energy by 2030. However, this target is in the way of being reached, but there are many roadblocks in the way which currently don't see that as becoming a reality. Nova Scotia Power has developed a 10-year systems outlook, which depicts their intentions to retire their fossil fuel fleet and bring online more renewable and also non-renewable sources of energy. So I'm going to break through their 10-year system outlook right now. Just bear with me. It may seem a bit confusing at first, but I'm going to tie it all in at the end here. So through 2023 and 2024, the utility is planning on bringing on 85 megawatts of new renewable compliant emissions-free energy sources on existing infrastructure. They also plan to bring on 100 megawatts of new wind energy through their rate-based procurement process. So this was announced by the province in August of 2021. And this rate-based procurement process is going to bring on 350 megawatts of renewable low-impact electricity from independent power producers who will be rewarded a 25-year contract with Nova Scotia Power to sell their power back to. So basically what this means is that there is going to be additional renewable energy coming online that is produced by another company who's going to sell it to Nova Scotia Power, who will then sell it to us. And what the rate base means is that the project that can offer the lowest rates to Nova Scotians will be the one that will be selected. And next year, they're planning on retiring Lingan 2, when that will take away 148 megawatts from the grid. Through 2024 and 2025, we'll see 200 megawatts of new battery storage coming online per the utilities plans. An additional 250 megawatts of wind from the rate-based procurement process that I just mentioned earlier. 160 megawatts of new wind outside of that rate-based procurement process. And they are going to be converting Point Tupper 2, which is currently a coal-fired unit, to natural gas. And they will be retiring one of their coal fleets. In 2025 and 2026, they plan on bringing on 150 megawatts of new combustion turbines. And just to let you all know, combustion turbines, I'll explain it here. So the utility develops these things called integrated resource plans, which they use to lay out their acquisitions over a number of years. In 2020, Nova Scotia Power developed an integrated resource plan And from that plan, they developed this new process called Evergreen Integrated Resource Plan, which basically is their outline to develop a green grid going into 2050. And through this plan, they plan on bringing on new combustion turbine fuel, which they are saying is going to be natural gas, and that where this gas is coming from will be known to us at the end of this year. And combustion turbine fuels is assumed to be low or zero carbon alternative fuels when available, but those technologies are not available right now. We do not have low or zero carbon gas or natural gas that we can use in these turbines. So effectively, it will be fracked gas going into these turbines. And just some more retirements for their coal fleet. And the next half of the decade, we'll see some more wind, more fracked gas, retirement of coal, some new wind, more fracked gas, and the retirement of Lingan 1 and 3. Moving into 2029 and 2030, we see the Atlantic Loop. For those of you who don't know what the Atlantic Loop is, it is a proposed project between the 4 Atlantic provinces that would include an increase in transmission capability between the provinces. An increasing transmission is not necessarily a bad thing. It becomes an issue when we look at what is going to be transmitted across those lines. And in this case, the main supply of electricity that would be carried across the loop is mega hydro from dams such as Muskrat Falls that are operated by Hydro-Quebec. This loop is expected to cost around $5 billion. However, this figure dates back to when the latest progressive conservative government formed in Nova Scotia, and it's safe to assume that this price tag has increased since then. Some more coal shutdowns. And then in the final year of this plan, some more fracked gas. So this chart here represents, through this plan, what we basically have as a summary of what we just talked about. So they are planning on retiring around 1,547 megawatts of electricity and bringing on, in the navy green here, we see 1,485 megawatts with other additions. So this includes the fracked gas and the conversion of coal to gas. And in the light blue here at the bottom, we see 985 megawatts. So this is the energy they are planning to bring online that we would classify as absolute zero, which includes wind and battery storage. You'll see throughout their plan, they had no mention of solar. So effectively, including the retirements up to 2030, Nova Scotia Power is not planning on bringing online energy enough to make up for those retirements that we would include absolute zero. Their plan is to bring on more natural gas in the Atlantic Loop, which are heavily costly, and frankly, the Atlantic Loop is nowhere near being started, or even we have no idea what the completion date would be. So basically, their plan is not a plan at all. It's a shot in the dark. All right. So basically, this means they're missing around 562 megawatts of replacement energy that would be if we just consider the absolute zero. So what needs to change moving forward? First of all, Nova Scotia has a remarkable renewable energy potential that is untapped in this province. The province has an average wind density of around 375 watts per meter squared. This means that for every meter squared in the province, there is an average possibility of 375 watts of electricity, which is quite a lot. And the current installed capacity of the province is nowhere near that. This includes both utility scale solar, on and offshore wind. Investments in renewable energy projects that focus on solar and wind projects should be prioritized above securing unstable electricity from our neighboring provinces, such as Muskrat Falls. There is more than enough renewable energy potential in the province to support the additional 562 megawatts that would be needed for the province's grid to be absolute zero by 2035. And this graph here just shows you how much cheaper it actually would be to achieve that. Right now, the levelized cost of energy in US dollars for the first half of 2022, see that gas and coal are much more expensive compared to onshore wind, fixed, and tracking PV. So not only is it better for us as customers for our rates, it's also better for the environment. So it's really a no-brainer. Unfortunately, they don't see it like that. We also need to see an increase in renewable energy storage solutions in the province. So with increasing the amount of renewable energy on the grid, there will need to be additional storage options available. Energy sources such as wind and solar are intermittent, meaning that energy isn't produced necessarily when it is needed. So being able to store this energy will be crucial to reach absolute zero and ensure that renewable energy is available when conditions aren't optimal. And there are a variety of different storage options that are available to utilities. Such storage options include pumped hydro storage and batteries. And in alignment with the David Suzuki report that I've referenced multiple times in this presentation, we recommend that pumped hydro storage is an immediate storage solution that could accommodate the additional resources for 2035, and that adding battery solutions into 2050 could be used to meet the increasing demand that is projected throughout the province and the country as a whole. The province also needs to get serious about getting off of coal. Nova Scotia Power Incorporated needs to create a concrete plan to phase out their coal-fired fleet by 2030. While we've seen in their 10-year system outlook, it does show that they are planning to take all of their coal fleets offline within the decade. Their actions are indicating otherwise. While waiting for power to be delivered from Muskrat Falls, the utility has delayed the closing of 2 of the province's coal-fired units, and in the process compromised the province's ability to meet its own legislative targets of reaching 40% renewable energy sales by 2020. So today we are asking Nova Scotia Power Incorporated to put forth a detailed plan outlining the exact month and year each of their coal-fired units will be shut down and exactly where the replacement energy will be supplied from. And this replacement energy must be from a guaranteed source that is not just a promise from another utility or a province. So basically, they need to let us know how they are going to be replacing the coal-fired units that are shut down, where that energy is coming from, and it has to be a source that it will be readily available at the date they are planning on bringing those coal plants offline. We also need to move towards more energy democracy. Energy democracy is a relatively new term, and we've been working on it extensively here at the Sierra Club. And basically what this idea entails is it's encouraging more municipalities, townships, and First Nation communities to control their own electricity supply. And actually, this is happening right here in our province. This map shows a number of communities and municipalities in Nova Scotia who are either have their own electric utilities or are in charge of their own distribution. So we see there's one in Antigonish, Riverport, Berwick, Mahone Bay, and Lunenburg. So if anybody on this call works for a municipality or is interested in energy democracy and is not sure where to start, I suggest reaching out to us or one of these communities, as they are a great resource and can guide you along that journey. Everything I've said today may seem like a shot in the dark, but we can get there. This graph shows it's from the David Suzuki Foundation, and it shows that the modeled install capacity of Nova Scotia's electricity grid for the year 2035. So this shows in kind of this mint green is wind, yellow is solar, this navy is hydro, gray is pumped hydro storage, and this black and white dash is battery, nuclear is purple, and the green is biomass. So this is what is already installed and what can be installed in the province. So nuclear and biomass, this report does not, basically what this report breaks down is that there will be no new large-scale hydro, no new nuclear, and no new biomass as a way to get to net zero. And we are in complete alignment and agreement with those 3 pillars. So all the nuclear, hydro, and biomass you see on this grid is already a part of that province's grid. And what we're seeing here, since the Atlantic provinces are so tiny, you have to blow them up a bit, but you'll see here that this is what our grid can look like in 2035. It can be mostly wind with existing hydro and bringing more pumped hydro storage in the gray. And what pumped hydro storage basically means is it uses intermittent energy and the movement of water as a battery. So when you produce too much energy, it can be stored in a pumped hydro storage facility, and then when you need it, the water runs through a turbine and then generates that electricity. And this would be very small scale, so it wouldn't have a large footprint on the environment. And that wraps up our presentation today. Thank you so much for attending. And you can check out our website here at beyondclimatepromises.ca, where you'll see a bunch of additional information about the Sierra Club and the Beyond Coal campaign. And you'll also be able to sign up for our newsletter if you aren't already signed up, where we kind of give updates on what we're doing as a club and any new information that we think you might find interesting. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then maybe people can put their hands up or write something in the chat if they have a question, and we can kind of have an open dialogue. I can just get caught up in the chat here.
I know there's questions about, getting this out to a broader audience, and we'll certainly do our best. This is being recorded and will be reshared in various forms. And you're welcome as well, once you get the recording, to share it amongst your communities and organizations if you work for one.
Does anybody have any questions about any of the information you may have heard today?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Cliff.
I did ask a question. I sent it in. Maybe you guys didn't get a chance to look at it yet, but I know our efforts are local for trying to bring all renewable, real true renewable energy. And I know you can only take one step at a time, but we may not be able to get ahead of the curve if the large hydroelectric operations to the north in the Arctic are not at least held accountable for what they've done to the climate. Now, I know for many of you that seems like it's not in my backyard and it's pretty far away, but the proliferation of the heat and melting of the permafrost is ongoing and has been for decades. And you Canadians, even though it doesn't seem like it's in your backyard, are the major contributors to that. I would think that simultaneously you would be working both nationally and locally to bring about clean energy, and you can't, you have to try to some way hold these large hydroelectric operations accountable for what they've done, and they know that they're melting the permafrost. They've made statements publicly, and they said it was unfortunate, but went ahead and did it anyway. So that's my question is, can you tackle both at the same time? You have to stop what's going on up there. Small hydro, I'm with you, can be maintained and environmentally safe. Large hydro, as going on up in the Arctic, is particularly problematic because the Arctic and the polar regions on our planet are the most sensitive areas on the Earth. And the hydrology, since the hydroelectric industry has gone sort of haywire with it up there, has changed the hydrology of the planet. And You know, I already listed some of those. So my point is I think it's important to move ahead on a few fronts there.
Yeah, Cliff, I agree with you that there's lots of work that needs to be done north of Nova Scotia in terms of raising awareness to the detrimental impacts of large-scale hydro in the area. So your question was, do you think it's possible to do both? It is possible. Unfortunately, there's a limitation of resources that are available, and getting boots on the ground up there is quite difficult as well, just because it's such an isolated area. We do work with the Grand River Keepers in Labrador, who are involved in that issue, along with Gull Island. So it is something that we are working on, but it is continually difficult, just where we're at right now in terms of our resources available. We have been in discussions with Hydro-Quebec extensively in the past. So we do have an open dialogue with them on that front, but we're going up against these big corporations is very difficult. I'm sure, well, you know that as well. They have a lot of people in their pockets and a lot of people's ears, and they're quite easily able to taint certain information in certain channels that we would use for our advocacy work. So we do try as much as we can. It does get watered down quite a bit, but it's definitely on our radar and something that we take quite seriously. I don't know if Tanette or Gretchen have anything else to add from a more national standpoint.
I'll just say, capacity. We absolutely care about this. We need more capacity. Evelyn, you have a question?
I've never heard it discussed before that large hydro in northern regions is causing melting. Where's the background? Where can one look for material on that subject?
Yeah, you can definitely respond, Cliff. I know we work with Cliff through NAMRA, which is the North American Mega Dam Resistance Alliance, which is a group that focuses on mega dams through North America. So there's lots of information on their website and through that organization, which Cliff is a part of. Cliff, I don't know if you have some links you can put in the chat. Maybe
I'll put my email address in the chat for you, Evelyn.
Thank you.
And if you send me an email, I'll send you some of the studies.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right, and now we've got a question from Dean. Dean asks, what is the best method of engaging Amira in dialogue?
I'll give that question to you, since you're our communications expert and you do a lot of the dialoguing between us and Amira.
Well, I do. I honestly, I'll give you my opinion, whether or not that's, Sierra Club or me, I don't know. So Gretchen, you chime in. But I'll give you an example of the challenge of dealing with Amira. We actually, following their annual shareholders meeting, at which point I had sent in a question that didn't get read on the floor. But my question was, how are you justifying the president and CEO, Scott Balfour, getting 8.2 million for 2021 and turning around and saying, we need to increase rates for Nova Scotia ratepayers? I'm just like, how do you do that? And so the question wasn't read on the floor, but I got a follow-up email from their communications person saying, we take your concerns so seriously, and would you like to have a meeting with us? And I'm like, sure, whatever. They were going to throw in a VP, And as it turns out, the president of Amira joins us on the call. So, so here we are on a call with the president of Amira and some VP of something or other and their communications person. Everybody's really nice, except for Scott, actually, I got to say, not a nice guy. You know, at one point I'm saying, look, even Nova Scotia Power is saying it may not reach its renewable energy goals for 2022. And those were an extension of the deadline. It was given in 2020 to reach 40% renewable. To which Scott Balfour said, yes, they're going to meet it because it's government policy and they always meet their government requirements or whatever. They just follow the rules. And I'm like, no, but he was doing his macho assertion thing, and it was hard to get in a word edgewise. But, you know, since that call and even before that call, you can search up articles with the president and CEO, Peter Gregg, talking about how they are concerned about meeting their 40% renewable target by the end of 2022. It really mathematically does not look feasible. So what's the best way to engage Amira in dialogue? I would say, Dean, that this isn't a case of putting reasonable arguments forward to a corporation and expecting a reasonable response. I believe, and one of the reasons I'm firmly in support of the energy democracy movement, is that we actually need to shift our audience. It takes a lot of time and energy to focus on conversations with presidents and CEOs and elected leaders. And they're really good at patting you on the head and saying, we understand, and we have kids too, and we care too. And I don't want to suggest that they're evil people, or as our friend Tom Webb would say, you know, I never met a Nova Scotia Power executive with horns, but they're in a system that really limits their ability to do the right thing. And for all I know, they may believe what they're saying too, you know. But if we can shift some of that focus to people in communities who want a different world, then I think we've got a shot. You know, it's got to start at the grassroots and move its way up. When it becomes a force to be reckoned with, then suddenly you've got the media calling you, and you know, Nova Scotia Power officials calling you, wanting to chat to see how that's, you know, what could we agree upon. And I think it's important not to give in too quickly. Anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents. And Gretchen, I don't know if you want to add something to that, or Dean, if you want to respond to that, and then we'll go to Charles.
Yeah, just very quickly, just echoing Tanette's perspective. I guess the only thing I would add would be 2 things: is they are a regulated utility, so you can use ways of engagement to get information out them. Just as Maggie presented so well here, we have a gap of about 500 megawatts. Let's fill it. Let's fill it with locally democratically supported energy. And I think that will prove to them that you know, they do need to pay attention, and just by upholding communities and supporting that transition is the biggest thing you can actually do to engage if you want to engage the utility. But yeah, you can, because they are regulated, get quite a bit of information about what they're doing. And I guess the second thing I'd say is we saw in Nova Scotia the solar industry push back very powerfully, as did Ecology Action Center, as did many groups, against something that would have penalized that industry and caused some businesses to be really hurt, even be put out of business. And I think that really shows that I just try to imagine that scenario if we didn't have a solar industry and it would have just happened. And that regulation that would have stopped the implementation and of solar would have just happened. But again, I think that illustrates the point. But if you support renewable energy that actually is lower impact and can benefit people, there will be a pushback against things like natural gas infrastructure, like mega hydro in the future. So those are the only things I'd add.
Can I just ask then, Charles, is your hand up for something related to this or no? Okay, then I want to go to one other question first because Abby posted a while back. So Abby's question was, is there a need for large-scale public engagement and education to push Nova Scotia decision makers in this direction? Maggie, do you want to start? And then I'll chime in with my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, the NS decision makers, they're aware of everything that was said today. They know all of this. In fact, the premier announced yesterday, I think, or the day before maybe, that they want to lease 5 gigawatts of offshore wind energy to independent power producers, and then use that to power the grid. And then whenever they don't use to help the green hydrogen economy. So they know of the tremendous offshore wind resources in the province, and they know that it's more than enough to supply clean energy to the people of Nova Scotia, but their priority is about getting in on where they can make the money, which is right now is a hot topic, is green hydrogen. And 5 gigawatts is more than enough to power the entire province effectively. But instead of doing that, they're going to use some of it for the province, and then some of it they're going to give to green hydrogen. So, I mean, that just shows that they know what's there, but they're motivated by the wrong things. So yeah, Tanette, you want to?
Yeah, 2 points. One about this announcement, and I believe it was yesterday, about the offshore wind. The reporting that I've heard so far does emphasize that it's all about getting into the green hydrogen economy for export. So I think as an afterthought, they sort of said, we'll use some to clean our grid. But there's actually in Nova Scotia Power's 10-year system outlook, for example, I don't believe it's even on the radar. And they're basically leaving Nova Scotia Power to figure out, getting Nova Scotia clean on clean energy, while the Nova Scotia government is like, how can we make some money here? But again, it's like, who's going to actually make the money? Somehow I don't think it's going to trickle down too far. I would like to say, Abby, with regards to, just sort of getting more information out to the public and so on, that, there was a report that came out last November by the Auditor General's Office and the Canadian Commissioner on the Environment and Climate Change, and it was called Lessons Learned on Canada's Climate Change Plans. In a nutshell, what it said was very damning. It basically pointed to the fact that Canada has never met a greenhouse gas reduction target that it has set. And despite signing multiple international, national commitments, goals, targets, whatever, since the early 1990s, Canada's emissions have increased by 20%. So I think we're at the point where there's a bit of a game going on here, where elected leaders and, utility presidents can say, yes, let's do that. We're going to do that. But then you get to the auditor generals who are crunching the numbers and you're like, oh, you mean we're going the wrong direction? How does that work? I do think that when communities start building things for themselves, like some of the municipal utilities in the Atlantic region, that's a real powerful disruptor. And it shows what's possible. And for example, like we have a webinar coming up next Wednesday evening titled, "What if the wind doesn't blow?" Because a lot of people are stopped by that question. So we brought the world expert invited him to talk with us about what you do, because it's actually very workable. So I'll stop there, and maybe Charles, and then we have a question from David Wimberly.
Oh, hi. Sorry to be coming in late on this, but I'm glad I got here when I did. Everything we've been talking about is about where electricity comes from and how do we get the power. But I'd like to just sort of open up a little bit of discussion about where the power goes and how it's used. And it just strikes me that our whole society is, the distribution of wealth is very, very uneven, but overall, we as a society are incredibly more wealthy than, say, we were in the 1960s. There are more cars, we burn more electricity, we fly all over the place, our houses are bigger, the list is long. And it seems to me that, if we're trying to supply cleaner energy, but the energy demand is still ramping up and up and up, then it's kind of a receding goalpost or chasing something that's getting farther away. So I guess a question you could tell me about, what is the overall demand for electricity in Nova Scotia? I'm assuming that it has gone up over the years and that it's still going up. And it's probably, maybe this isn't the group to work on this, but I think some group, we need to work on a culture shift where we don't have this growth culture of infinite exponential growth and just do whatever we want, buy whatever food we want from out of season from any country in the world, and fly wherever we want. And it's like we can do whatever we want because it's limitless life. We're living the dream, right? But it's a nightmare for the earth. And so at some point, we need to be working on a culture shift where we can embrace more impoverished, physically impoverished, but perhaps emotionally, socially, and spiritually enriched way of living, where we're not so materialistic and so on. But so my question, I guess the only question for here is about what has the demand for electricity in Nova Scotia been, and what direction is it going? Are we chasing a receding goalpost?
Charles, I can actually answer that question for you. So in their 10-year system outlook, Nova Scotia Power does provide a forecast for the net system requirement that will be on the grid. And part of their outlook is introducing demand side management initiatives, which would include energy efficiency improvements and other ways to reduce demand on the grid. So the results of this modeling showed that the annual average of demand on the grid would increase by 0.3% from today. So it's actually not a substantial increase of demand on the grid, but that's only if all these initiatives that they are discussing are implemented on time and effectively. So again, it's kind of in the hands of the utility to incorporate all these things in order to actually achieve what they're saying. So that's like where programs like with Efficiency Nova Scotia and other efficiency programs come into play, decreasing demand. But there's also, like you said, the cultural era we're in, where we're used to getting things whenever we want. We're used to turning and flipping a switch and getting power whenever we want and using it for as much as we want. So there's a balancing act between changing how we consume, but also making it more efficient when we do consume. So I don't know if that helps you at all, but I can include the link to the 10-year system outlook for anybody who is actually interested in giving it a look.
I'm going to jump in to say it's not in a utility's interest, like Nova Scotia Power's interest, to actually radically reduce demand, including peak demand, because that's where they make their money, right? So they'll give a little, you know, because there are some targets that it says it's going to try and meet. But there's a conflict of interest because it doesn't help their bottom line. But if you were to take the profit out of it, we could absolutely reduce electricity demand more. And I agree, there needs to be a cultural shift in how we think about more. And when talking with utilities, there's a kind of laying blame at the feet of consumers, saying, well, you know, people aren't going to compromise. But as somebody who's been wearing a mask for 2.5 years, I'm not so sure about that. And I think we should at least be consulted on whether we want to give an inch for the planet. Okay, so we have Cliff, Evelyn, and Jacob. Cliff, if you could be brief, so we can get more people in.
Yes, I will be. Following up on your comments around trying to make a culture shift, it is well known now globally that the fossil fuel industry does not want to give up their model. They are in the process of obstructing everywhere they possibly can, and we really need to take our kid gloves off when we communicate with our friends and new people, and let people know the reality. The fossil fuel industry wants to keep making money. It's not going to let its model go. There was a mention of green hydrogen. There's been several studies that green hydrogen requires huge amounts of energy to make, and we don't want to burn. We're going to burn fossil.
Cliff, your audio is kind of going in and out.
So
I think you're covering your speaker.
Okay, so you know the green hydrogen was mentioned, and green hydrogen requires a huge amount of energy to make. So we don't want to increase our energy output to make a form of energy that's green by burning even more fossil fuels. So we have to be very careful, even when we get involved with wind. We really need to have certain upfront requirements, because it could be a fossil fuel company that's going to want to build wind turbines, and they'll take 4 decades to do it, because this is part of their plan. They want to obstruct and slow the process down.
You bet. And that's what I added in the comment there, that, you know, we're also dealing with regulators that are, you know, with the fossil fuel industry, and now they're going to oversee wind. Okay, David just reminded me that he was in the queue with a question in the chat, so go for it, David.
Thank you. My question is, well, just a second, I'm on 2 devices. My question is, I'm trying to get to the, Jesus, put this underneath here or something.
I just removed it, so you'll be good.
Okay, good. Thank you. I tried to turn everything down. Okay, but my question is that it seems ridiculously hard for individuals and companies to just provide solar on their rooftops in excess of their own personal needs, and get rewarded for it. And in fact, often for businesses, it's so restrictive that it doesn't even make sense to put solar on their rooftops or elsewhere. I know of someone who recently tried to put on solar in an entire shopping mall in the Halifax area and just gave up because it was so restrictive that they would not be rewarded for it. And this could be really significant. And I've heard the excuses, but how do we overcome this?
Gretchen or Maggie?
There was a recommendations put forward by Solar Can, which is a national solar energy group, and some of those recommendations are for Nova Scotia, which include removing certain restrictions that are in place against the solar industry. So these things include, like, you're only allowed, if you have a system on your house, you're only allowed to produce X amount of energy, even if it's less or more than you require to use. They only want you producing enough that you are going to use. They don't want you producing more so that you can sell it to the grid and help offset emissions provincially. So part of our recommendations through this work is recommending to the province that they install these recommendations put forth by Solar Can. And I'll link that report in the chat too, because they have lots of good stuff in there. But again, like Tanette said, it's all about who's regulating. If we have the same people who are regulating the fossil fuel industry also regulating wind and solar, that's a conflict of interest. So it requires taking a deeper dive as to who isn't implementing these rules and restrictions on the renewable energy industries, because a lot of it is deeper than we think. And it's a mess to untangle, but it needs to be untangled by somebody. So removing all the roadblocks that are in place of renewables such as wind and solar is part of our recommendations to the province.
And it requires systems change.
Yeah,
not just electricity grid changes, but Evelyn.
Thanks. I should explain the reason I'm here today is that I was born in Yarmouth. My dad came from Cape Breton, from a coal mining family. The Auditor General's report on, let me start again. The Government of Canada has looked at big, new kinds of ways to deal with the energy future. One is carbon capture and storage. Another is green hydrogen or hydrogen production. They don't even insist on green at this stage. What are some of the others? They all take huge amounts of money. They're all ridiculously slow to develop. They are uncertain in terms of the technologies involved, and the public is going to be soaked for putting money into those kinds of projects. It drives me crazy. The Auditor General's report on the goals that the government has set for itself, the federal government has set for itself in the hydrogen production area, is good reading. Let me recommend it to you. You can get it online. And it's just as clear as day that this is not something that has been refined at all in terms of the intellect that has gone into it. It's a question of lobbying power, of oil and gas, and nuclear, small modular nuclear reactors. There's one going up just river from me. And it's a shocking kind of mess of policy development at the federal level. Let me recommend the Auditor General's look. The other thing to think of when you think of hydrogen is that the last attempt by the Americans to put a new rocket in space going around the moon has been delayed twice because of hydrogen fuel. Once you produce the hydrogen, it is damned difficult to keep it under control and prevent explosion. You need to use energy to transport it in massive energy use ways. So hydrogen is something you can feel absolutely keen on rejecting. as far as I'm concerned. Thanks.
Thanks, Evelyn. And it's one of the topics we're going to take up with Mark Jacobson next week. I too have tons of concerns about even green hydrogen at this point. Jacob, hello, you have a question?
Oh, we can't hear you, Jacob.
We're hearing not quite. Now, Maggie helped me figure out my mic a little while, or at the start of this call. If you go to where you see the microphone and click on the little arrow above it, you may have to also select your microphone choice there. Not yet. Damn. You can also type your question if you like. Okay, I lost him. I think he's going to try and log back in. Are there other questions we've missed in the chat? Agreement from Dean on the need to degrowth as public policy. Lots of work to be done on this. Yeah, I don't see why the wealthier percent are also generally responsible for higher levels of our population voluntary pursuing ed growth. I probably didn't read that very well.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah,
Jacob.
we can hear you.
Awesome. You.
Go for it.
Just 1 second. Can somebody talk? Just a second. Oh, I don't hear anyone.
Can you hear us?
No. That's a fun problem. Oh, there we go. So the microphone versus the speaker. There. Okay. Okay, I think I can. I heard something now.
Okay.
Sorry about that. The technology can both make things easier, but also more complicated. So I've been attending the URIB hearings either virtually or in person over the last week and a bit, and it's interesting to see all the work that goes into their capital plans and their projects. How they do demand side management, but they're usually their focus is like their lens is providing power as a company. Everyone else here has already talked about that. They're not necessarily going to get the benefits of certain energy production strategies. Like if we electrify, other companies could provide power to transportation over the grid. Like there's all kinds of ways that things could happen. So the slides that Maggie had posted included the 10-year system outlook, and I was reading up, and it's almost 600 megawatts of some sort of new fossil fuel turbines. And I'm like, why are we investing in more infrastructure for, like at this stage, we're complaining we don't want to shut down coal infrastructure, right? We're like as a company, they want to keep it going on a financial basis. So part of my question is if we use their lens, why aren't they investing in more energy storage as an investment if part of what natural gas peaker plants do is regulate the peak, and that's harder to, like, that's not your baseload power. So I don't know if anybody remembers the COMFIT process that happened with wind a long time ago, but Judith Lipp wrote a policy paper like ages ago, and she was focusing on having communities invest in small wind, and that helped get wind spread throughout Nova Scotia. It would be interesting if Nova Scotia was mandated by the government, the provincial government, to do like a COMFIT study, but for energy storage, so that they have money being invested in that area. Because I'm not certain in the next 5-10 years that they're allocating more than they need to, and they will use the example that, well, natural gas is a known solution. And I hate the term alternative. They've used it so many times to sort of dismiss and otherize energy storage or renewables in the past. So with all that in mind, it would be interesting for them to do a cost analysis of where to best put energy storage on the grid, and allow, like, to do requests for proposals from Nova Scotians to do those investments. And I'm just gonna put a case study in the chat. It's just a link to one. So Australia is way ahead of the curve in terms of energy storage. They've been investing in it heavily. the EIA, the Energy Information Agency, I think it's the correct version of the acronym, is looking at like energy storage historically, but also by 2025, there's going to be a massive uptake in scaling of these things. And I think what we need, like this is one of the only solutions that even 20 years said is, well, it's not firm dispatchable power, so we can't do renewables. And so this is the only logical out that I see in the short term. Like as you know, if you want to increase renewables in the grid, you need something that's firm and dispatchable. So it's either got to be natural gas or coal or biomass from their lens, right? But from our lens, from a green lens, we say we don't want to put any more carbon into the atmosphere. We don't want to destroy our habitats. So I would be interested to see next steps. You know, there are all kinds of environmental impact experts. They have to look at what are the impacts to the offshore areas if we do offshore wind. You know, are there marine protected areas? Like how does this benefit? Is it good? Is it going to hurt the Nova Scotia ecology and economy? So I'm definitely pro wind and pro energy storage, but I don't know how it'll be done. So I guess my question is how can we like play those chess pieces and get action they need to go, and kind of, you know, helping them along to make the decisions, where otherwise they're just going to fall back on what they know, right? They know how to build a plant, they know how to maintain it, and that's what they have. But we can create so many jobs, right? Like both this Sierra Club, the AAC, and all kinds of groups across Atlantic Canada have been saying there are jobs in this. I know Emma Norton, a previous energy coordinator at the AAC, said something like the electricity rates might go up, but bills should go down if we design a system accordingly. And my one contention with being at the hearings is people hear the message of, well, we can't afford to pay more, but it's sort of a loaded question. It's like, well, are we actually truly reducing the bills for lower income Nova Scotians? Like, are you charging extra $10, and that could be the decision between a loaf of bread or rice or food or bus tickets to get to work? And I don't think people hear that when they don't know that, like they don't emotionally understand what it's like to be able to afford things. So I just think that the provincial government is in a better position to make certain allowances for those things, because I don't want renewables and green methods to be in an adversarial position to affordability. So like I don't know the right answer. I think collectively as a society we do, but we need the right motivations and directions for things. And I'll stop talking. Sorry, that is my rant.
I'll jump in to say that I think we have to challenge the assumption that renewable energy costs more than fossil fuels. It's actually not true. I mean, I gave a presentation last Monday evening to the UARB, the Utility and Review Board, and it's very clear that the only way they can make it more expensive, and I'm talking about Nova Scotia Power here, is by forcing ratepayers, customers, to pay for writing off coal plants and paying interest on underestimated fuel costs, and focusing on big infrastructure projects, which cost a heck of a lot more because they want 9.5% guaranteed rates of return, and on it goes. So let's commit to telling people that the cost of wind and solar is cheaper than coal, which is like quadrupled or something crazy in the last 2 years. It's cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than fossil gas, it's cheaper than oil. And another fun fact, the cost of battery storage has come down. I believe it was 43 or 46% in the past 5 years. So they're trying to get us to drink their Kool-Aid, and we got to push back and say, actually, that's bullshit, you know? Dean had messaged me and wanted to ask a question. So we're going to go to Dean next.
Thanks, Tanette. I'm listening very intently to the discussion, and it's very challenging when you're faced with, large monopoly corporations or groups of monopoly corporations because of the resources that they can command. media, monetary, etc. I really do think the major issue here, I mean, we need to keep engaging with those groups, absolutely, but I don't think we can have false optimism that we're going to see the rationality of our proposals, because it's their viewpoint is that centralization is better. And I think most of the viewpoints I'm hearing here is that decentralization is somewhat of a requirement in order to get to a sustainable a net zero grid, because the centralized solutions just never seem to work. So having said that, we will need a combination of centralized power and decentralized power generation. And we just need to keep working on that, because that's an educational thing. I think in the very beginning, Maggie, you showed the progression from the very earliest days when private corporations looked after generating power with coal, and then local municipalities took over, whatever they could find locally, whether it was hydro or electric generation through fuels. But what they didn't have was the ability to take it to the next level of technology. And so you saw those utilities fall by the wayside as they were gobbled up by larger entities who had those abilities. A few survived, as was shown in a very good illustration here during this seminar. And those are showing tremendous potential for how we can implement that decentralized strategy. And as much as we're always going to probably have Nova Scotia powers or Amiras, we do need to carve out a very strong and viable space for communities to control their power. And I really do think that's where the key efforts have got to go, because if we just deal with Amiras and Nova Scotia government and Canadian government, we're just going to keep going in circles. As much as we do need to continue to engage, we've got to look at, really where can we move it forward in a real sense. And that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you all very much for your comments.
Thanks, Dean.
Okay.
Well, what do you think, Maggie?
I think that's it for questions, unless anybody else has any last words, departing words. Jacob, yeah.
Sorry, it was faster to raise my hand than actually hit the button. I just put a link in the chat to a very old Flash-based map that I had produced a long time ago called the Nova Scotia Energy Map. You can still view it in a browser called the Puffin browser, but you can actually add wind farms on the map or solar farms on the map and see the energy production. So the data is based on 2016 and previous data, but it had forecasted data in the Maritime Link up to 2020, I think. So if you ever want to show like a kid or a high schooler what the current grid looks like, it's a bit old now, and so it's not as current, but it is a fun project. And in some year, I would like to update it to work on regular browsers again, but that's a whole project in itself.
Neat.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Jacob. So yeah, that concludes our presentation today. There will be 2 more webinars in this series. Next Tuesday at the same time, we'll be discussing Newfoundland and Labrador's electricity landscape. And then next Thursday will be combined New Brunswick and PEI at the same time as well. If you registered for this webinar, you registered for all 3. You're not required to attend all 3, obviously, but you should have got a calendar invite for all 3. Please share them with your networks if you know anybody who would be interested, if any other folks work in the Atlantic provinces and not just Nova Scotia. And then also next Wednesday, we have an evening webinar with Mark Jacobson titled, "What if the wind doesn't blow?" If you're not already registered for that webinar, you can do so at the link. I believe it's in the chat. Ocean posted it a bit earlier. So yeah, I would like to thank everybody for coming out and hearing what we had to say today. And thank you everybody for the dialogue and for your great questions and for coming out and having this conversation with us. It's much appreciated. And
thanks, everybody.
Have a great day. And the recording, it is recorded, so I'll share it with everybody.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, see you soon.
Bye.